In discussions about marriage and divorce, the topic of domestic abuse inevitably comes up. Whether you're in favor of traditional marriage, or reject it in favor of something more progressive, surely we can all agree that divorce is necessary, and even praiseworthy, when one partner is being abused by the other. But what is domestic abuse really? And what is the domestic violence industry really about? Stay tuned to find out. I'm against divorce in most cases. I don't think people should get divorced for frivolous reasons, but no-fault divorce is necessary, because otherwise victims of domestic abuse wouldn't have a way to escape from their abusive spouse. How many of you have heard someone say something like this? I suspect most of you have. In fact, I'm absolutely certain that everyone watching this video has encountered a divorcee at some point in their life who stated that the reason that they chose to dissolve their marriage was because their ex-partner was abusive. But there's something else I'm absolutely certain of. Consider all the divorcees you've ever met or heard about that cited abuse as the reason for their divorce. How many of them were men, and how many of them were women? Let's get real. All of you answered women, didn't you? In fact, this isn't just something I'm basing on personal experience. It's backed up by volumes of peer-reviewed research. For example, a 2001 study conducted at the University of Oklahoma found that while there are a plethora of reasons that men and women alike might give as the last straw that led to a divorce, 44% of women cite domestic abuse as the reason for their divorce, as opposed to only 8% of men. And that's not the only study to have found as such. This might lead you to believe, as many do, that men are more likely to abuse women than vice versa. But is that what's really going on? To answer this question, we have to consider what exactly is meant by domestic abuse. If you've ever received an educational course about the issue of domestic abuse post-1980, it's almost certain that the terminology and concepts being used found their origins in what's called the Duluth Model. Coming from feminist researchers in Duluth, Minnesota, this model has become the most widely adopted strategy for combating domestic violence around the world. But don't be fooled. The Duluth Model isn't about putting an end to actual violence. It's about putting women in control of men by defining abuse so broadly that any woman anywhere can define any male behavior as abuse. Let's take a look at the webpage titled Abuse Defined from the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Although the page opens by stating that abuse can be committed by persons of either gender, a quick look at the power and control wheel presented on the right side of the page shows that all examples of abuse cited are in the context of a man abusing a woman. What is the source of this power and control wheel? The Domestic Abuse Intervention Project, found in, you guessed it, Duluth, Minnesota. Now, I want to be clear that I do not believe that the use of physical violence against one's partner is ever acceptable, whether you're a man or a woman. However, proponents of the Duluth Model typically use the terms domestic violence and domestic abuse interchangeably, so as to obscure what they're really up to. Here's the definition that the National Domestic Violence Hotline gives us for what domestic violence is. Domestic violence, also called intimate partner violence, domestic abuse, or relationship abuse, and as an aside, notice the interchangeable use of the words violence and abuse there, is a pattern of behaviors used by one partner to maintain power and control over another partner in an intimate relationship. Now, notice that despite being about domestic violence, this definition doesn't limit itself to physical behaviors like hitting or threatening with a weapon. It defines domestic violence, and/or abuse, as any behavior used by one partner to maintain power and control over the other. That's why you'll find that deeper inquiries into what exactly constitutes abuse will always involve terms like emotional abuse, financial abuse, psychological abuse. So what exactly is the dividing line that separates criminally abusive behaviors from behaviors that one partner simply doesn't like? Let's look at this power and control wheel from the Duluth Model. Here are some examples of abusive behaviors as defined by Duluth. Under the Using Coercion and Threats tab, an example given is threatening to leave her. Again, leave her. This is the Duluth Model, so it's talking only about men threatening to leave women. So if a man threatens to leave his wife if she doesn't comply with his demands, according to Duluth, that's an abusive behavior. But what if the roles are reversed? If a man doesn't want to do what his wife wants, and she threatens to leave him, would that be an abusive behavior? And further, what kind of demand are we talking about? Are we talking about demanding that a partner seek treatment for their drug addiction? Or are we talking about a demand that a partner's work bonus be spent on a new Escalade as opposed to a vacation to Hawaii? These kind of questions matter, but they're not explicitly addressed. The next spoke on the wheel, using intimidation. Making her afraid by using looks, actions, and gestures. So, in other words, if a man just looks at his wife the wrong way, that's abuse. Seriously? And further, one person might be intimidated by a certain look, while another person might see nothing wrong with it. So by what objective standard do you decide what looks and gestures are and are not abuse? Next, using emotional abuse. Putting her down. Calling her names. So if you call your wife honey or sweetie, that's calling her names, right? Is that abusive? How do you determine when one name is abusive and another isn't? Using isolation. So if a man tells his wife that he doesn't want her hanging around that other guy anymore because the other guy is openly flirting with her, is that abusive? Minimizing and denying blame. Saying that the abuse didn't happen. Okay, well, if a man is accused of abuse without evidence, and he denies that it happened, is denying it, is that itself a form of abuse? Using children. If a man threatens to take the children away from his wife, that's abuse. But do you think it would be called abuse if a woman threatened to take the children away from the man? Women do that all the time in divorce court, and they're usually praised for it because the children's safety is paramount. And here's the real kicker. Using male privilege is one of the spokes on this wheel. If a man makes all the big decisions or functions as the head of the household, according to the Duluth Model, that is itself abuse. In other words, according to this model, merely believing in traditional gender roles is itself abuse. And then finally, using economic abuse. Taking her money or not letting her have access to family income. Both those things are abuse. Now really think about this one. So if he takes her money, that's abuse. But if she takes his money and he objects, that's him not letting her have access to family income. So who gets to decide what's her money, what's his money, and what's family money? I think you all know the answer. In this model, it's the woman. Because with every spoke on this wheel, what you can see is what determines whether or not a behavior is abuse is not the behavior itself, but how the woman feels about the behavior. And therefore, abuse is only abuse when it's male on female. Domestic violence experts have worked to hide their true intentions by appealing to everyone's common intuition that real physical violence is wrong. But study the Duluth Model carefully, and you'll quickly realize that it's not about preventing real violence. The Duluth Model defines abuse as any behavior that a woman does not like. And therefore, so long as the Duluth definition of abuse is accepted, any woman in any relationship can always find a behavior that her male partner is committing that can be defined as abuse. Well, her husband has no such luck, since abuse is defined not by the behavior itself, but only by how the woman feels about the behavior. Think about it. If a man in any sense tries to deny his wife something, if he objects when she wants to go into debt, if he tells her that he doesn't want her flirting with another man, if he tells her that she's been drinking too much and it's threatening the children, All these legitimate concerns can be defined as abuse under the Duluth Model. But reverse the gender of the parties in question, and suddenly it's no longer abuse. This is why I find it so disingenuous when people cite abuse as the reason why no-fault divorce needs to be allowed. If by abuse, one means actual violence that threatens another person's life or physical well-being, then you already have the right to defend yourself or to flee the situation so as to ensure your safety. But if abuse is defined as broadly as it has been under the Duluth Model, then what marriage ever could be said to be non-abusive? I mean, seriously, what marriage in the world never has a disagreement about finances, or how to raise the children, or relationships with people outside the family? And further, in the modern paradigm, the thing that defines whether or not a behavior is abuse is again not the behavior itself, but how the woman feels about the behavior, which means that at the end of the day, abuse as defined by Duluth is a wholly subjective matter, and any woman anywhere could claim that her male partner is abusive, and she'd be right. In summary, I don't think it's acceptable to use violence against one's partner, and this goes for men using violence against women, and women using violence against men. However, the fact that violence is unacceptable does not in and of itself have a direct effect on one's obligation to fulfill the terms of a contract that was entered into voluntarily, including marriage contracts. If you and your partner agreed prior to marriage that any behavior that was mutually defined as abuse was grounds for termination of the marriage, fine. That's between you and your partner. However, if a notion as ill-defined as abuse under the Duluth Model is a blanket grounds for no-fault divorce, no matter what agreements were made between two parties voluntarily, then no person can ever be held to the terms of the marriage contract. All one need do to nullify their obligations is allege abuse. Besides, an honest assessment shows that the modern domestic abuse intervention system is not about putting an end to actual violence. It's about putting women in control of men through force of law. And that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth. Everyone, please take a moment to subscribe to my 2 cents on the BitTubers and BitChute platforms. YouTube has shown that it is no longer a viable platform for independent content creators, and we need to build a presence elsewhere before the inevitable censorship comes. The links to both profiles are available in the BitTubers tab on my website, my2centsvideos.com. Thanks everyone for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, as well as hit the bell to receive notifications so that you never miss an upload. And if you're a fan of my channel, please consider supporting me on Subscribestar, Bitbacker, or Patreon to receive special rewards. All links can be found in the About section of my website, my2centsvideos.com.